You don't need a weeks-long certificate program to start using design thinking principles today to plan your company's year-end strategy sessions. We start with empathy. My name is Tucker Johnson. I'm joining you today from the beautiful Arboretum here in Seattle, Washington. And it might be a little bit noisy. There are some kids playing in the background and they are adorable, but that's okay because when you work remotely, the world is your cubicle. And sometimes that cubicle can get noisy. The first thing that we need to do is we need to define our audience. Before we can truly understand and empathize with our users, we need to figure out who those are. In traditional design thinking, it was for product design, so the users would be the users of that product. However, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. For example, I'm using design thinking as a tool, as a methodology to plan and to run the strategy sessions that we're having at my company at the end of the year. So I'm defining my users as my internal leaders, as my internal team members, rather than as the company's clients. So that's just an example of how you can adapt this process in a number of different ways. So within that audience that I've defined, my internal team members, I of course have segments of that audience. I have different departments. I have sales and marketing. I have our production, our research department. So there's different segments within that. But my main audience that I've defined, the one that I've been targeting and trying to empathize with in this process, is my internal team. Phase one of design thinking is all about understanding your end user. What do they want? What do they need? How do they relate to your product, your brand, your service? Why do they relate to your product, your brand, your service? The more that we can understand about our user, the more that we can add value to them. This is the heart of the design thinking approach, which is to always keep the user in mind. So as we go through this process, even after we get through phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, the user is always the first thing you should have in mind throughout this whole process. So let's look at 3 very practical things that we can do, and I'm going to show you what I did as I was using design thinking to plan my year-end meetings. Let's get to work. The next thing that we need to do, once that we've defined our audience, once we've figured out who it is that we're trying to get feedback from, is we need to gather that feedback. And there's a number of different ways that you can do this. And there's a whole spectrum, all the way from just sending a simple survey to doing in-person, multiple day, intense focus groups to really understand their needs. The reality is, you usually end up doing something in between those two. And for example, what I've done this year is I've sent a survey. It's not really a survey, but I've created a shared Google Sheet where people can log in and I've sent that to all of my team members, and people can log in and they just leave their concerns and comments. I sent a very simple request to them. Please open the spreadsheet and insert any questions, concerns, or comments that you have that you would like to see addressed during our annual meetings. The reason I did it this way was because I like the transparency of it. I like that people can log in and see each other's comments. But then again, we have a very transparent culture at my company. If that's not the same at your company, if you have a less transparent culture, then you might want to do something differently. Maybe send a closed survey or gather feedback in a more anonymous way. The last thing that I have to talk about really isn't a step, but it's more of a principle. It's more of a point that you need to keep in mind during this process, which is that you need to stay open-minded. This is not the time to judge or evaluate any of the feedback that you're receiving. If you're doing in-person interviews or talking to people on the phone, it's very important that you simply ask questions. You not pass judgment or make any comments on people's feedback that they receive. There's a time for that. It's going to come in a later phase, but right now we're focused on phase 1, and it's strictly just understanding who is our user and what makes them tick, really trying to empathize with them. If we're passing judgment on the feedback that we're receiving from them, then it's blocking us first of all, from being able to empathize properly with them. And second of all, it's making them self-conscious and less likely to provide honest feedback if you're evaluating their feedback in real time. So make sure to approach this in an open-minded way, going into it without an agenda, and save your feedback and save your criticisms and save your questions and all of that stuff. Save it for a later time. There will be a time and a place for that. Now we have no excuse not to get started, guys. One of the beautiful things about the design thinking process is that it is flexible and it is agile. However, a lot of people are still resistant to getting started. Perhaps there's a little bit of intimidation there about starting a new process. So if you're intimidated, I implore you, don't be intimidated. This is a methodology and an ideology that is here to provide you a new way of looking at things. It is not meant to be restrictive at all. We can get started right away. Define your audience. Create a quick survey and send it out to those people. Start gathering that feedback. Start learning more about your end users and empathize with them. What are you waiting for? There's nothing standing in our way. We can start immediately. In this video, we covered phase 1 of design thinking, which is the empathize phase. In the next video, we're going to be covering, you guessed it, phase 2, where we really define our challenge statement. So we're going to be writing challenge statements, point of view statements, and just taking it further and further into the design thinking process. If you'd like to continue following me as I use the design thinking process to plan my company's year-end strategy sessions, then make sure to subscribe to this channel down below so that you'll receive updates when I post new videos. I'm going to be documenting this whole process through the year end, and it's either going to work or it's not going to work. And if you want to find out, then subscribe so that you'll find out. Once again, my name is Tucker Johnson, and this has been Remotely Possible from the Arboretum here in Seattle, Washington. Thank you for joining me and all of our remote colleagues as we continue to push the limits on what is remotely possible.